Well, friends, it's 7 o'clock on the dot, and people will join us. If we haven't met, my name is Reverend Maya, and I'm grateful to invite you to welcome you to Islington Reads. We are we are zooming to you from Etobicoke, land of the Alders, the indigenous lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, and we are working always to be in relationship with each other and right relations with the original peoples of our land. And one of the ways that we keep growing is by reading. So this has been a journey for us as we're now into a couple years of doing this. So we're grateful to be together tonight and to hold space as an affirming place where people are able to name who they are and be themselves in the world and find welcome and acceptance here. And there's room for differing opinions. We say we don't love the same, vote the same, but we do, and we don't think the same, but we do make space to learn from each other. And tonight we have the chance to learn and to listen to Éric, and it's a pleasure to have him. And the team that I work with to bring this together, Anne, Maria, and Beth, are going to hold space for questions. And after we have time with our author, the gift will be that if you want to stay on a little bit longer and have more of a traditional book club, those who want to stay can stay with Anne and I after question time with Beth. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Anne to introduce Éric to us.
Okay, tonight we're welcoming Éric Chacour, who is the author of this book. Oh, it's not going to work with the background.
A blurred book.
What I Know About You. Éric was born in Montreal to Egyptian parents and has shared his life between France and Quebec. A graduate in applied economics and international relations, he now works in the financial sector in Montreal. And Éric, you can correct me if that's not true anymore. What I Know About You is his first novel. And I'm going to probably massacre all the French words. Ce que je sais de toi won the Prix Féminin des Lycéens in 2023 and the Prix des Cent Continents de la Francophonie in 2024, and was shortlisted for the Prix Littéraire des Collégiens in 2024 as well. The English translation is by Pablo Strauss and was published in 2024 by Coach House Books in Canada. It was shortlisted for several literary awards in 2024, including the Giller Prize, the Dane Ogilvy Prize for debut books by LGBTQ writers, and the Atwood Gibson Writers Trust Fiction Prize. So we're so happy to welcome you tonight, Éric. And if you would like to tell us a little bit about the writing process and how you managed to work in the financial sector and also write. And then if you would like, we'd love it if you'd read a little section from your book before we turn it over to Beth for questions.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks a lot for providing the opportunity to have this moment with you all. I'm very moved to do that because it's always an emotion to talk about something as intimate as a book that you have written with a new audience. And by new audience, I mean people speaking another language than yours, at least in your mother tongue, a new public. And I always envision that kind of moments as moment of exchanges. So I'm very grateful to Reverend Maya and Yuan for making possible that moment. And I'm sure we will have a nice one, or at least I hope. Um, and sorry in advance for my English, which is not so good, but if you don't understand something, I will try to rephrase it. About my writing process, well, if you want a lesson on how to take 15 years to to write 300 pages, I can give you one, but I'm not sure I'm the most efficient writer in the world. Writing has always been a hobby for me. Well, a pleasure, actually. And something that brought me peace, a peace of mind. I know that there are some artists who say that writing is like taking their heart out of their body and it's very difficult for them. For me, it's the opposite. It has always been something very, I don't know, I feel peaceful after that. And it began when I was a teenager. I think it's an age where you are feeling various opposite feelings, and it was very helpful for me to have this way to process my thinking and then to, I don't know, to conclude with something which was written. And at first I was writing poetry. um, well, not exactly. I was writing songs, lyrics from songs. I wanted to be a lyricist. That was my dream. That is still my dream, actually. But that piano, which was my mother one, which was my mother's, I don't know how to play it, unfortunately. And so I was always like, okay, I want to be a lyricist, but I cannot compose anything. I don't know any friend who is a composer, and it's still a problem for me because I still want to write lyrics. So I was like, okay, what's the next best thing? And the next best thing actually was to write a novel, because I didn't need anyone else to help me with that. I could just rely on myself. So when I had some time, I was writing a piece of my novel. At first, I had my plan. I knew exactly chapter by chapter what I wanted to tell. And when I had some time off, I was like, okay, that may be a moment to bring a piece more of what will eventually be what I know about you. Um, so yeah, I wrote that book without thinking too much of it, and that's why it was on such a long period of time. And when it was finished, I was like, wouldn't it be nice to just try to see if one publisher could be interested by it? So I sent it to one publisher, which was the publishing company based in Quebec called Alto. Actually, I was working in the book fair with my cousins, and like we used to do every year, but this year was very different because I had finished that manuscript, and they didn't know exactly what it was, but they knew it was a novel. So there was like this game of looking if we could find the future publisher for the book. It was like a joke, and all of a sudden we were seeing the stand of Alto, who eventually would become my publisher. And my cousin was like, "Oh my God, it's my favorite publishing company. You should send it to them." So I went, and on the very night I was logged in their website and looking at the authors they had in their catalog. And I was like, these look like good authors. There is Catherine Leroux, there is Nicolas Dickner, Larry Tremblay. Maybe you don't know them because they are more famous in Quebec, but here in Quebec they are quite famous. I guess you may know Catherine Leroux. Maybe she won Canada Reads last year, and that very Catherine Leroux, who is also a publisher, an editor actually, sent me a message 1 month and a half after, telling me, is the text still available? And can we see each other? And that's how it all began. So, yeah, in a few words, maybe that was the process of writing.
Thank you. Would you be interested in reading us a little excerpt from the book?
Of course, I would. Just give me 1 second
I can
so I
show
can find.
everybody the cover now because I took the blur off the background.
Okay, perfect. We're a team. Let me find a book and I'm coming back.
Betty's giving you lots of things to ask questions about in the background.
Yeah, look at all the records on the wall.
I know. The poet, lyricist. Here he comes.
There is always one somewhere. Sorry for that. Okay. It's at the very it sorry. It's at the very beginning of the novel when Tarek is a kid and he's wondering when would life begin. Um, so life would start later. The here and now was not life, but something else. A waiting, a respite, perhaps a dramatic preparation, but for what? More precisely, what were you being prepared for? You had always preferred the company of adults to children your own age. You were in awe of people who never hesitated, the ones whose every action seemed to confirm their grasp on the whole and entire truth, the ones who could, with equal aplomb, criticize a president, a law, or a soccer team, the ones who could, with a snap of their fingers, answer the thorniest of questions: Palestine, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Aswan Dam, the nationalizations. So that was adulthood, stamping out doubt in every shape and form. One day, it would dawn on you that there were few real adults in the world, that no one ever truly gets over the original fears, adolescent complexes, and fulfilled need to take revenge for their first humiliations. If we still find ourselves surprised when someone we know reacts immaturely, it is naive. There are no childish adults, just children who have reached an age where doubt becomes a source of shame. Children who begin to conform to expectations, stop questioning authority, make confident statements without a quiver of doubt, grow intolerant of difference. Children with raspy voices, white hair, a weakness for alcohol. Years later, you would learn to flee such people at any cost. But back then they fascinated you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to invite Beth and off we go. Thanks.
So, Eric, thank you again for being with us this evening. And if you and the others will indulge me, before I start to ask my questions, I want to tell you a story about how I originally read your book. Um, I'm a big fan of the Giller Prize, and every year I try to read between 2 and 5 of the nominees. Sometimes I get through all of them, lots of times I don't. So I went into the local bookstore and I thought I knew which book I was going to pick up. And so I flipped it open and it looked good. And then I picked yours up and I couldn't put it down. Like I needed to know after the first half page, what kind of car do you want when you grow up? And after the first half page, I knew enough about these characters and where they were that I was really curious. I had to get this book. And I bought it and I loved it. And anyone who's a Facebook friend of mine knows that every year on the last day of December, I post my 5 favorite books of the year. And this book was at the top of the list. I just thought it was beautiful and moving. And I was kind of devastated when it didn't win the Geller, but I mean, there's lots of good books out there. So nothing against any of the other nominees. But this is a really wonderful book, and I feel so honored that we're able to speak to you tonight. So thank you for making the time to be here with us.
Well, thanks a lot, Beth, because once again, it's a first novel, so everything is brand new for me, and having people like you giving the emotion they have felt through the reading of a book is something quite magical for me. So I'm very moved by that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start by asking about the way the book is written. It's written, much of it in second person, which is, written with you instead of he or instead of I, written using the word you. And so that's a very unusual choice. There aren't a lot of books written in second person. And I wondered if you always planned to write it in that way, or if that was something that came to you during the writing process.
It was very clear at first. I wanted to say it at the second person, which wasn't at the very beginning, was the moment of the revelation. When will I say who the narrator is? And in the very first draft of my plan, I was like, maybe at the very last pages, I will say who the narrator is. And then I thought it was too much of a, an American movie, taram-tam at the end, the big revelation. And I thought it would bring some more light to the whole story to know it roughly at the half of the book. So that was very clear for me. I wanted to tell the story at the second person, and I wanted, someone on the internet one day said that it was like a detective novel written in poetry, and I really loved that review because I was like, of course, it's not a detective novel and it's not poetry as well, but maybe there is something about the intention behind each of these two type of writing, which has to do with my personal intention when writing it. And the second person has something to do with the detective novel thing, because I wanted people to be a bit disturbed at first by this second person. It's as you said, it's not very usual to have a story told at a second person. And then I wanted them to forget about it. And all of a sudden, it comes back in your face. Of course, if there is a second person, that means that there is also a first person. And if there is a first person, then it's a character. Is it one I already know, one I will have to discover? So it's funny because you have two kind of readers. Those who led the detective inquiry from the very first pages, uh, trying to find out who the narrator is, and those who completely forgotten about it. And then it was, oh my God, of course, I should have thought about it. So the truth is, I'm not the biggest of readers. Um, I I don't read a lot. I read a lot more since I'm a writer because I have to when I meet other writers and I want to know what's the book behind the person I'm meeting, or when I have some discussions in book fairs, for example, or TV shows. So I try at least to read their book, but it's not something very natural for me. So I was like trying to create my own way to assemble a story, and that was a funny one. But it was also a big challenge because I knew who the narrator was, but of course, you, the reader, you don't. So there are some information I know I cannot give you because the narrator. And first of all, um, do all the people attending that session do they have already read the book or not? Can we? Is there a
Yeah,
risk we can spoil or?
no, 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 no. I would say go ahead and say, I think most people finish the book or do their best to finish the book. And I
Okay.
think we always say, when you come to book club, there might be spoilers, but that's okay. Like most people will have finished it.
Okay, so let's spoil. So the narrator is the son, okay? And of course, um, if you had to tell the story of your father, well, it would be very awkward for you to talk about the night of love of your father with your mother, for example. And of course, if your father was cheating on your mother with a male prostitute, it would be even more awkward to tell about it. But when you're a reader and you are reading the book without knowing who the narrator is, it's like, okay, but they have just kissed each other. Why there is this very modest curtain down on the scene right now? There is something. So it was a whole challenge for me to deal with information I knew I could or couldn't give the reader when the reader didn't know why I was putting a curtain at that very moment. So it was a good idea as a concept, but when doing it, it was a whole challenge for me.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I didn't think about any of the difficulties of a son telling, essentially his father's story and some of the hard parts. So I think you did a really good job because it seemed very smooth to me. It seemed very natural in the way the story progressed.
Well, it's always the same. It has to require a lot of work to look simple.
Mm.
So that's what I'm trying to do when writing, and the same for my translator when translating, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm. I wanted to come back to one of the comments you just made that I thought was really lovely, that someone described it as being a detective story written in poetry. And there were so many beautiful lines and beautiful sentences in this book, like just I couldn't begin to, start mentioning them all. But something I really loved was the way you framed it at the beginning and end of the book. And it was a phrase, he would be wary of simple questions. So at the end of chapter 1, um, from Tarek's point of view, where he's writing, where we're learning about what kind of car he would like and what he said he would like to be as an adult. You wrote, you were 12. From that day on, you would be wary of simple questions. And then at the very end of the book, with his son, you wrote the last sentence in the whole book. From this point on, he, the son, will know to be wary of simple questions. So, first of all, I thought that technique was really beautiful. But I was curious because there are so many themes in this book that you could have put a spotlight on by putting them at the end and the beginning. And you used the simple questions. He would be wary of simple questions. So I was wondering, why did you focus on that? Why was that important to you?
I'm not sure I would be able to explain it. Um, what I know is I always try to put some little things like that, little Easter eggs, and some reader would find them and other won't. You have a good memory because you remember that at the end of the first chapter there is the exact same sentence than the one at the end of the last chapter. But some people who some people wouldn't notice it, and I love to put some Easter eggs, including for people who would reread the book. You know, sentences that could look totally um common when reading it at the first time, but when you know who the narrator is, well, that same sentence have a complete different meaning. For example, there is the chapter about the death of the father, and it begins with the sentence, I think something like, "Fathers are made to disappear," which is quite obvious when you are talking about the death of a father. But when you know who the narrator is, then of course this sentence has another meaning because he has also a father who has disappeared. So I like to put some Easter eggs, and maybe people see them, maybe they don't, and it's fine, you know. It's something I don't know. It's something very common in video games. I'm not a gamer, but in video games you have that. You know,
Mhm.
you are on a level, and the conceptor of the video game has put something tiny, whiny detail that you don't see at first, but when you fight the same level for 15 times, then you finally notice it. And I wanted to create more or less the same experience in the book, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, awesome. I think we've done a number of books. We've been meeting since early in COVID. I think this is the first time we've done a book in translation. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the process of working with a translator. Like, did you get to choose the person who translated your book? Did you work together, or did he mostly work on his own and then you saw it at the end? Just tell us a little bit about what it's like to work with a translator.
Well, the first thing is that I have never understood my own writing so well than when writing with translators. Because translators are people trying to find out exactly what is the intention behind each sentence. And in my case, some of the sentences had been written 15 years ago. So to find the intention I had at that time was a bit difficult. Um, and so they obliged you to verbalize, to phrase some of your intentions, which are not always so clear in your mind. So I learned a lot about my way of writing. The book has been or is in the process of being translated in 15 languages. So each one is a brand new adventure, and there are many ways translator work. Some of them are very close to the author. They want to ask many questions to the author, really understand the each word and be sure their interpretation is close to the intention of the author and all that. And some other don't even have any communication with the author, and it's fine. I always prefer when I have some exchanges, but it doesn't always happen. In the case of Pablo, um, I didn't choose him. He's the one who chose me, actually. He read the book, he liked it, and he wanted to see the publishing company telling them, you should buy the right for that book, and I would love to translate it. And when it happens like that, it's it's a pleasure because you know you're in good hands, you know. It's not something that fall in his desk on the Monday morning, you know. He chosen it. So he chose it. So it's something that means something for him. And we had quite a close conversation about, you know, in translation there is always two things to balance. Um, at least for me, the level of nuances and the musicality. And at some points, he was like, okay, that sentence in French, you made one sentence, but if I need to translate it in English with the same level of nuance, well, I will have to translate it by three sentences. And depending on the place the sentence was in the text, sometimes I was like, okay, we have to keep the same sense because it's very important to have the nuance just here. So I was like, if you have to translate it by three sentences, go ahead. And in other cases, I was like, here the most important thing is the musicality. So we can lose some of the nuance. It's not so important. One example I'd like to give was with my Spanish translator. I had a sentence. I don't know exactly how it was translated by Pablo, but I had a sentence about the letters sent by Ali to Tarek. Okay, and I'm going to tell it in French, but it's not a problem if you don't understand. It's just for the musicality. Elle sentait le mauvais papier, la rature et le manque. Elle ne disait jamais je t'aime, elle disait tout je t'aime. And there was this word in French which is manque, lack in English, but also miss. So manque could be translated in Spanish in two ways. The first one would be lack. Okay, and so my translator was, do you mean that Ali is living in poverty, in the lack of things, dans le manque? Or are you saying that he misses Tarek? Because tu me manques, I miss you, et vivre dans le manque, to live in poverty. Okay, and it's the same in Spanish. So what do you mean exactly by manque? And I was like, if you listen to the sentences, the first one is 8 syllables. The second one is 6 syllables. The third one is 8 syllables. The fourth one is 6 syllables. So it's something very symmetric, you know, just like in a song. And I'm not counting on my fingers when writing, of course, but when reading it and trying to find out what my intention was, I was pretty sure that when writing it, it was for the musicality. So I was like, you can even forget the word monk if you don't want to talk about it, but try to keep the musicality in that place because it's what is the most important in that very part of the book.
That's and you know, hearing you talk makes me understand why the book reads the way it does because it is poetry, it is music on the page. And to hear you break it down into syllables and the way they sound. I've heard lots of authors speak, and I've never heard anyone speak in that degree of detail about syllables and the way back-to-back sentences work. That's really extraordinary.
That's because I couldn't be able to be a lyricist. So I found another way to write songs. But but
Well
but
done.
jokes aside, I think it really comes from that. Um, because when I was a kid, I was really rewriting songs on existing musics. So I was very constrained by the number of syllables, and I think yeah, I kept something from that period of time, I guess.
Yeah. So while we're talking about music, I'm going to ask you something about music that appeared several times in the book. The musician is, I think, Mohammed Munir, that you mentioned in the section of the book where Tarek meets Ali and his mother. And then music is also an important part of the book when Tarek returns to Makatam and is recognized by his old patients, and they start to sing to him. Now, obviously, music is really important in your life. You've, you know, just throughout this interview, you have talked about it, and I see the background in your home. Um, is Egyptian music particularly important to you?
Not so much, but in the second scene you are mentioning, the one in Muatam, when he returns back to that place close to Cairo, um, the whole scene is built around one song from Dalida. So Dalida was an Italian singer. Well, and she was Egyptian born, but she was from Italian origin. And then she moved to France, and she had an immense career in France. She's very, very well known in France until now. And at a moment of her career, she decided to go back to Egypt. Well, not to live there, but to have like a sentimental comeback and sing a few songs in Arabic. And until now, people in Egypt know one of her songs, the one in my chapter, which is Helwa Ya Baladi, My Country is Beautiful, um, which is still a very important song in Egypt, you know, in stadium when there is, I don't know, a goal, people to express their joy will spontaneously sing that song. During the revolution in Egypt, people in the streets were singing that song. And I'm pretty sure they have even forgotten who was the first singer of that song, which is Alida, but it was her. And that was a song quite important in my childhood. You know, it was on the cassette my mother used to play on the cars. Even at the time, you don't exactly identify who is your mother and who is the lady singing in the car. You know, you are confusing them a bit. But Dalida has always been part of my life, and especially these Egyptian songs. I was singing phonetically because I don't speak Arabic. Um, they were very important, and if you have the opportunity to listen to that song, I think it's one of the most beautiful songs in the world. Of course, I'm a bit biased, but you should try to find it because it's an important. And the scene you are mentioning is actually my favorite scene of the book. Um, and it's the inspiration for that scene was, have you seen the movie The Dead Poet Society?
Yes. Yeah.
What was the most moving scene in that movie, if you remember?
So the only thing, because it's been a long time, the only thing I remember about that, or the main thing I remember about that movie, is when one of the characters gets up on a desk and starts to recite, "Oh, Captain, my Captain."
Isn't it like destroying your heart when you see that? Um,
It's so powerful.
when I listen to a song and I have some emotion. When I see a movie and I'm emotionate, I always try to understand where the emotions comes. And I think in that very scene that you were describing, so for those who haven't seen the movie, there is this scene at the end of the movie where the director of the school comes with the teacher to explain to the students that the teacher will be fired because he was not in line with the rules of the school, etc. And all the students loved that teacher. So it was a strange moment, you know. Everyone was staring at each other. They didn't know exactly how to react. And then all of a sudden, it happened what you described. Someone went on his desk and said something. Oh, Captain, my Captain, which was like a symbol they all would understand. It was a way to pacifically protest against what was happening. So everyone was looking at him. What's happening right now? We don't exactly know. And then someone else did the same, went on his desk and said, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." And the scene ends up with two-thirds of the classroom on their desk saying that as a signal of pacific protestation about what was happening. You know, if you look at my scene, it's exactly the same. The doctor comes back to the Muattam. Everyone is here. They are wondering what is happening exactly. Will he stay? Won't he stay? And then they understand he won't stay. So they are all a bit sad, of course, and they don't know how to react. They are staring at each other. And all of a sudden, there was this lady who pacifically, in sign of protestation, decided to sing that song because it was a song they all had in common because they used to listen to it when they were in the clinic of that doctor. So everyone was just like looking at her, and then someone else began to sing with her, and those who didn't know the lyrics were just clapping in their hands. And it's the same creation of a moment, of a momentum, you know, something very spontaneous from a crowd where everyone is linked by the same emotion without having prepared anything. and then the emotions comes. So once again, I'm not the biggest of readers, but I'm very inspired by other form of arts. We were talking about songs. Uh, I'm talking about movie right now. Theater also is a source of inspiration. And yeah, I wanted to use that song of my childhood in that scene, I guess.
I love that. And, I love hearing how you've been inspired. Often writers are inspired by other writers, and that's awesome because, we love books, we love to read. But I love the idea that we can take inspiration from all kinds of art, from movies or paintings or video games. Like, there's so much out in the world to take inspiration from. And it's really fresh the way that you were inspired. Like that scene is just engraved in my memory. And I love how you were able to use your emotions when you saw that scene to create your own scene in this book.
Well, thank you. I think, yeah, emotion in general, not only art, but emotion in general. When you feel something very strong, it's interesting to try to understand what created that emotion and is it something reusable. Um, Another example is Romeo and Juliet. I'm always saying that this is like my own gay Romeo and Juliet in Egypt. And everyone is just like, okay, he's saying that because it's a love story, and Romeo and Juliet is the most famous love story. But it's absolutely not this I'm referring to. Um, in Shakespeare's play, there is this mechanism, incredible mechanism, of making Juliet die, and then Romeo sees her dying, so he decides to die also. Well, in my case, he goes in exile, but it's the exact same thing. And then Juliet was not dead, and she dies again. And that mechanism is so strong, so witty. Um, the whole book is based on the exact same mechanism. Well, in Shakespeare's plays, it takes place in maybe 10 minutes. In my case, it's on many years, but it's the exact same way to build a story. So, but of course, I cannot say that in interviews because people have not read the book. So I, I don't want to spoil too
Don't
much.
want to give it away. I get it. Yeah.
But yeah, having inspiration from other forms of art is always something, yeah, instructive, I think.
Mm. There are so many great characters in this book, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions about some of them. Um, the women in Tarek's life are his, other than Ali, it's obviously a love story between two men, but Tarek is so, I guess, inspired by or so influenced by the strong women in his life. There's his mother, his sister, Nazreen, his wife, Mira, Fathea or Fataya. How do you pronounce her name, the housekeeper?
Fathaya.
Pattaya. Okay. So, why did you make it? Because it's a love story between two men, why did you give so many women supporting roles in this book?
Um, you know, I used to say that my family is like the English royal family, who which makes big queens and very little kings, and I'm I'm one of the little kings. Um, Women in my family are very strong, and I think this is something maybe more common in traditional society when they don't allow women to take their place in the public space. So, in most cases, they have to take it back in the private one. And I think I wanted to tell something about it. We have the impression that the book is very masculine because what I know about you, well, we understand later on who is the I, but at least the you is a man. And in each and every cover in the 15 languages, it's always one or two men represented. But I think it's really not a masculine book. I think it's a book about women. I think the most important characters of my book are women, the most interesting one, because who are the male characters? Tarek, who has never decided something for himself. Rafik, which is, I hope, someone you are emotionally connected with, but he's a young boy with that long life, so he hasn't so much depth, and Ali, who we don't know so much about, actually. Um, and the strongest characters are the women. You talked about Fathia. She's my favorite character, for example. And when writing a character, I'm always what's the most important thing for me is the how could I say that the inner fight of each character, the personal struggle, you know, the thing that twists your stomach in knots in the morning when you wake up. Uh, and I could talk for hours about the inner fight of each character. Fataya, for example, she's a woman who has so many things to say, but no one is listening to her because she's the family servant, So she's part of the family because she goes with the family on vacation because she has to cook, she has to do the bed, etc., etc. But at the same time, she's not from the family. She's not part of it because she's the family servant. So everyone is telling her, "How are you?" in the morning, but no one is listening to the answer. And she's everywhere. She listens to everything. You cannot have a phone conversation without having her somewhere in the house doing the cleaning and probably listening to what was happening. And all of a sudden, she discovers an audience, that lady that no one was listening to for
Mhm.
her whole life, you know, uh, discovers her audience, that little kid that needed her because she had some information he wanted. So she is like diluting the 2 grams of information she has in her story of past lovers and dead singers and all that, and her consideration about her employer and all that. And I was very touched by this fight, of a woman that has at last the opportunity to say to the world what she had to say. Um, but each of the character, and especially the feminine one, has their personal struggle, and I think it's important to know them even more than the physical appearance, at least according to me. I mean, it may not a general rule, but for me, yeah, that's what's the most important thing when writing.
Thank you. Um, I have to ask a question or two about Ali because he's obviously such a big character in the book. And he is, and his life is so different than Tarek's life. They're just born into completely different circumstances. From the point of birth, really, their expected trajectory is completely different. And of course, they see the world in different ways. So, do you think this is one of the reasons that Ellie was attractive to Tarek? Do you think that's one of the things, like, was he a breath of fresh air to Tarek? Do you think that's one of the reasons that they did have this relationship?
I think it's even more than just a breath of fresh air. I think in a way, Ali is the version of Tarek he could have been if he had less constraints. Um, Maybe in another world, Tarek could have been this young man, full of life, full of liberty, not seeing the world with the same constraints than him, not having the same expectations of the society, of his community, of his family on his shoulders. Um, and I think Tarek falls at least as much in love with the handsome, witty, clever boy he's with than with the version of himself he could have been in another world. Um, I think there is something that has to do with that. And yeah, I wanted them to be very not opposed, but very different. They don't have the same religion, they don't have the same level of wealth, they don't have the same, well, the least we can say, they don't have the same job, they don't have the same family environment. Actually, their only common point is to be two Egyptian male in that country at the end of the 20th century. And ironically, it's their only common point, which is condemning them more than any difference they have. And I wanted to say something about this completely absurd paradox.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, so much of the book is about identity, how how the characters identify in their roles in society, how they identify with their sexuality, and you explored that through many characters in many different ways. I want to come back to Fatea for just a minute. And I thought it was really interesting that she had the same name as the sister, Nazreen, and the family said, well, that's too complicated. We'll give you this other name, which is a way of totally obliterating her identity and giving her like a new name, which is like our name is who we are. I was curious about why you did that. So tell me what made you think to do that?
You know what? That happened in my family.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I wouldn't have been able to invent that. But when my aunt told me that, I was like, no way. My grandmother told the family servant to change her name because she has the same than you. So I was so like amazed by that possibility, which is, as you say, the worst way to obliterate the identity of someone, you know, removing her name, deciding you are the one capable of removing her name.
Mm.
And I wanted to be, and I think it means very much about this society at that period of time. And honestly, I have received many testimonials from people telling me it happened also in my family and not only in Egypt. So I was really amazed by that. But yeah, you're right. I just wanted to show how absurd these things were and how deshumanizing, I don't know if you say that in English, but removing your humanity, your, well, yeah,
Your
taking
identity.
out your name and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I see that we're running short on time. I have so many more things I would have loved to ask, but I will keep it at one simple question. I know it took you almost 15 years to write this book and get it out. Are you working on something else, and do you hope to publish another book?
Always wary of simple questions.
Touche.
That one especially. Yeah, it's funny because I always had two ideas very clear in my mind, and I wouldn't be able to tell you why I began with that one. But now that is written, I just want to allow me some time to write the second one. Um, it's a bit of a challenge because there are some expectations, I guess, after the first one. So I'm trying not to think too much about it and just recreate the innocent pleasure of writing. It's not always easy, but I guess there are tougher things in life. So eventually I will hopefully
I hope
write
you do,
something.
and I will look forward to reading it in English. Éric, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really great. I'm going to pass it back to Maya now to close the meeting, but thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Beth, for the questions.
Well, I'm almost speechless, which for a preacher is a hard thing. I guess I want to say we see you. We have been blessed by the behind the scenes, but also the story of your life tonight. Someone chatted me in the middle to say, "This is blowing my mind." The way that you have taken the words of your heart, the words of poetry to help tell a story that I know many of us are going to go back and read again in another way. But I did have the privilege of holding your book and for someone who reads pretty fast to take the time with it to really savor some of the lines and to give thanks. We really want to offer thanks to Pablo for loving your work because that comes through in the translation for us, for you to not ever apologize for not knowing English in the way that you need to, or because you are being you in and writing from the place that you're created to write. So I want to say thank you for that. My One of the pieces I love about Tarek and Ali is that they both have this call to be healers. And in our world right now, in the way that people are using words to divide us, the way that you have drawn from the other artists and the inspiration in your life has allowed us to hold the story of love that I think can heal. So I want to say thank you for being a co-creator with the other artists who've inspired you, a weaver of wisdom and beauty. And we want you to just know that this group of people is cheering you on and not expecting you to be anything else than who you are. And we also will, as people of faith, hold out a prayer for you to meet the musician who will let your lyrics turn into music, because we know that that's possible. So we bless you into writing that next thing and creating the thing that makes the world better for all of us and that helps people be seen in your story. So from the bottom of our hearts, we say thank you tonight, Éric. We bless you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm not
Well,
sure if I know how to open up the chat. That's my big job right now, so people can pour into you. I think I can do it.
Everybody puts their comments in the chat. There is
Yes.
a technical way that after the meeting ends, you can access the chat and send it to Éric.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, just do that and then it'll come to me and we can save it. So, because I'm just trying to do that right now. And for all of you readers, whether you're taking 15 years to write a poem or a story, I hope you're inspired tonight by Éric. And also stay tuned for the next author who will be with us, we hope in the month of April. So we will share with you who that is. And you can keep your mind and heart open for who that will be next. But for now, Éric, we just bless you and thank you for this time, and Beth for your questions, and Anne for your intro. So thanks.
well, thanks a lot, Reverend, and it was a moving moment for me actually. So you were saying that you were speechless a few minutes ago. It's my turn to be a bit speechless, which is not also also a good thing for a writer, but Thank you for all this. It was a very sweet moment.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.